really matters about when those studies were started. Where if you just start monitoring projects now, we're already seeing the effects of 40 years of climate change with many of the habitats on the planet. So we have to be very, very careful about how we interpret those results, how we compare things. And it's good to go back to first principles, so that idea about how temperature and metabolic rate and temperature and developmental rate are related, very, very strong empirical evidence. There's no question about it. We have to be really, really careful because many of those are done in a lab with everything controlled. And in the real world, like I mentioned, there are synergistic effects. So we can't always expect those changes to happen probably in the same direction, but the magnitude is going to be quite different. And it's really going to be important for us to take that into consideration. And I think in places where things deviate from what we think should be happening, that's going to be critical as well. We should pay attention to those. Many times those things are ignored because we can't explain them. I think we need to pay more attention and try to understand things a little bit better. But really what it comes down to is that we have a lot of problems facing us in the future, and the way that nature works, and the way ecology and evolution work aren't going to change. But we can change the way that we think about trying to solve these things. I think we have to be creative. I think we have to work, as Bruce mentioned before, together with a lot of different stakeholders. And it's the only way we're going to see these solutions come to life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. The next speaker is Dr. Ray Brown from the University of Kansas, who's going to be talking about, assessing biodiversity hotspots, of which there are many in Asia, and of which we need to be especially concerned, especially after hearing David's talk.
Today we're talking about defining biodiversity hotspots and integrated studies of species diversity. This is a process that began a while ago with the definitions of biodiversity hotspots, and it's one that continues to this day. And if you haven't noticed, the public loves the news of discovery of new species of frogs. The descriptions and excitement that people bear from the discoveries of species of frogs continues all the time now, and it's something you see in major news institutions around the world. Over the last decade or so, here's some data from the Global Amphibian Assessment. Over the last decade or more, people have come to the conclusion, a consensus, not a big surprise, but the idea that amphibian species diversity is not uniformly distributed across Southeast Asia or the Himalayan realm. Rather, diversity is regionally partitioned into small pockets of extremely high diversity, which are, this shows the shape of that scale here, diversity being higher, species diversity being higher in the red end of the spectrum. And diversity is partitioned in these areas that we think of as global conservation hotspots. It's not a new term, but it's a very important one because that's where all diversity is. And if we put protected areas in those areas, we have this possibility of being able to preserve and protect large percentages of the amphibian diversity. So we think of some of the countries here that we know earlier across Southeast Asia as sort of the superpowers of amphibian biodiversity. As a result of this, here are those countries. Here's a graph of the countries and numbers of species. And blue versus red bar shows the endemic species or the non-endemics. These endemic types, of course, are the ones that occur in those countries and nowhere else. And the non-endemics are ones that are shared with at least one more country. So you can see this whole group of countries here that we again think of as the frog or amphibian biodiversity superpower countries. And then there's sort of the next group, which we think of as the runners-up. And there's an interesting pattern that emerges when we move up to thinking about the runner-up, the next category. And that's that there's a group of countries like Laos and Myanmar and Thailand that have relatively high diversity, but they have a lower percentage of the total fauna that is endemic just in that country. Whereas countries like Sri Lanka and Philippines, here coded in blue, have a larger portion of the total fauna that's high, they're high in diversity, but they have very high endemism. They have lots of species that don't occur anywhere else in the world. So I'm going to talk today about this example from the Philippines because it's just what I've been working for the last decade, but this is a procedure that can be applied across all of Southeast Asia very rapidly, and it's something we generally advocate. Now, this is a very simple question: how many species of frogs occur in the Philippines? And the answer to that question has changed radically over the years with the work of several prominent herpetologists. Today, we're back to the sort of consensus that there are about 108 or 110 described species And now, just I want to provide this example from the Philippines where we tried to take this objective and formulate an approach to asking whether that was an accurate assessment or whether Amphibian University was underestimated. And so the methods for this study, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I just want to explain what we did because it's very simple. So we obtained DNA sequences from all of the known species of frogs, and then from about 900 other samples of different populations of these same things. We targeted isolated islands and isolated drainages and mountain ranges to obtain a broad geographical sample across the whole country. And we obtained DNA sequences, and this is a sort of straightforward process of amplifying DNA, determining the DNA sequence, and then doing what we refer to as a phylogenetic analysis, which is an estimate of the species' evolutionary relationships. And again, I won't go into too much of those methods, but we determine what we think of as an estimate of the evolutionary relationships. And the answer, the output of one of those studies is this branching diagram that represents the evolutionary history or our best estimate of the evolutionary relationships of a particular group of frogs. And then the question is, how many species are possible to define across that group? And one way of doing it, if you just focus on the genetics here, is to identify genetically divergent lineages. And you can do that in a very straightforward manner. Identify, in this case, this is a group of frogs in the Philippines, 6 possible species. You can look at traditional morphological characters. These are just the physical characteristics, and these, of course, are the characteristics that taxonomists have been studying forever, and identify similarity and differences between taxa. And then the third sort of axis that we take is these bioacoustic analyses. And these are audio spectrograms, and then the relationship between frequency and time. We think of these as sort of the voice fingerprint of the mating call of frogs, the visual way to represent the mating call. It's a very convenient way to diagnose differences between species. Non-specialists can just look at that and see that there's 4 very distinct differences right there. So we add up all those things, and in the case of phylogeny again, here are 3 species that have been named and have been described. And the question is, these other ones on the tree, are they possibly new species? That one looks distinct, so yes, maybe that one looks distinct. But this one here looks like it might be the same kind of pattern as this one, so possibly not. But if you take all of this information together in a really sort of simple-minded way, and ask across the whole tree of all the frogs across the country, are they genetically distinct, acoustically distinct, physically distinct? And if the answer is yes for one of these 3 criteria, we think that it's possible candidate species. And if the answer is yes for 2 or more, then we think yes for sure. And so here is a tree. It's also a phylogeny. It's just drawn in a circle, an evolutionary estimate of all the frogs in the country, in the Philippines. And those are the named genera, different groups of frogs around the country. So this is for about 1,000 DNA sequences. And I just want to take you through one example with one genus. This is this economically very important for our group of frogs called Wimbetes, the fanging frogs. So here are the main species. These are the 7 species that are known now. These blue dots represent the genetically distinct lineages. The red dots represent the ones that are morphologically distinct. And the green dots are the ones that represent acoustically distinct species. And so we're very confident in recognizing the ones that have those criteria piling up as definite new species in a very non-controversial way. So if we do that across the whole tree, just a simple bean counting exercise for the country, here are the families of frogs, here are the numbers of known species, around 110, here are the additional candidate species, which brings us to a total of somewhere probably around, I think, 180 to 190 candidate species, and this incredible rate of endemism of upwards of 95% of frogs that don't occur anywhere else in the world. So that's a big change for our understanding of Philippine frog biodiversity. And again, this isn't rocket science. This could very easily be applied across Southeast Asia with a little cooperation between people who work in these different countries. In this case, you can see that this has changed our perception of the Philippine biodiversity hotspot dramatically. Now it looks like one of these superpowers of biodiversity, and with this incredibly high proportion of the species that occur there don't occur anywhere else in the world. So this is, again, an interesting, innovative, simple, straightforward approach to identifying biodiversity hotspots. And we advocate using multiple lines of evidence, and again, these are not very sophisticated methods that could be applied by groups of people collaborating together from all different sectors. We advocate, we feel that this intensive sampling effort is still required to elucidate the true patterns of species diversity. You can see those patterns here as they were apparent 10 years ago. But we think that the current understanding of biodiversity hotspots in Asia are sometimes linked to sampling efforts alone. Here's a great example here in Borneo. I just want to call your attention to this one. Look at this high pocket of frog biodiversity that's occurred in northern Borneo. And the southern edge of that frog biodiversity hotspot follows perfectly the political boundary between Malaysia and Indonesia. Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't think the frog biodiversity is that much higher in Malaysia than it is in Indonesia. whole rest of this portion of Borneo probably has upwards of concentrations of frog diversity that is just unknown. I think that what we're seeing here is an artifact due to unequal sampling effort. There's been a lot of diversity work in Malaysia, and there's been less so in southern Borneo and the Indonesian portion of the island due to logistical obstacles to research. So, just to sum up, conservation priority setting requires this informed taxonomy of basic species diversity estimates. In this case, I showed an example of Philippine biodiversity being much higher than previously thought. And we feel that embracing the underlying process of diversification is a great way to incorporate that issue. It must be done to incorporate provide an informed priority setting for conservation hotspots. Ongoing species discovery and implementation must remain an integral part of conservation efforts. I think we all agree now, that with, at least in the amphibian community, that there's a lot of conversation, and now's the time to put research, to shift to conservation action beyond those discussions and beyond some of that research. But we really feel it's important that biodiversity discovery continue as a part of that action, because we feel that so much of biodiversity is unknown, and there's probably a lot more than 7,000 species of amphibians out there today. Anyways, I'd like to thank Fleming and Will for being here, people who invited us to this, to have this occasion at this conference, and thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Ray. And I would be negligent myself not to specifically thank the IET National Committee and the Korean Organizing Committee for allowing us to have fun to organize this conference and to bring previous speakers from overseas. And hopefully, after we have our talk, we'll be able to get together, put our heads together, do a brainstorming session, trying to figure out how to implement the Amphibian Action Plan, which you'll hear about shortly. But in light of trying to get all sectors, all IUs, CN member organizations, all constituents of IUCN, all of us, all people together, we meet here to view of business models. We've prepared several companies, and we're very fortunate that Matthew Tullian from the water company will be talking about how this firm looks at biodiversity problems specifically in Malaysia and probably beyond. Matthew, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you very much to Jaime for inviting me, because I'm French, and I'm very sorry that the first legs are still part of the French astronomy. So I'm here to share with you a business perspective on biodiversity conservation at large. So what I'm going to do a quick introduction on my company that you may not know already, and I'm going to share afterward a case study that we have on the water pollution sites in Malaysia, in Dugu. So the area water is part of a large environmental services group called Area Environment, and we have also waste management activities, energy services and transportation. Basically, we design, build and operate water production and wastewater treatment plants in many countries in the world. This is some technical here. Our corporate strategy towards biodiversity is in line with the general corporate strategy of the group, which is based on this SBR vision. I start with the last one, responsibility, that in our core business we have to be exemplar and to take into account the environment within our activities. The first one on service is to say that today most of our activities rely on what we call gray infrastructure. We operate plants, but we try to promote the use of green infrastructure that could also help to produce water or to treat water. And the last one is value, and it's a more prospective reflection on the business model that's on which we rely, and to get away from getting paid on the volume and more getting paid on the quality of the service, and that implies integrating the way our activities maintain or enhance the ecosystem services. So now we're getting into the topic I've been asked to share with you. So how for us meant to play a role in the private sector. So we'll try to figure out now. So in Dunwood, Veolia Water operates a water production plant that supplies a Petronas industrial complex. This site is located near a virgin coastal forest reserve called Bukit Bok, and we have more than 300 hectares of natural habitats with a very high potential in terms of biodiversity. So you see on that map the limits of that site. We have a specific water production mode because we do not produce taking water directly in the river, but we abstract water from the river. That river is directed in off-river storage that is mainly natural, and we take the water from that off-river storage, then we direct it to the plant to treat it and to deliver it to the Petronas complex. So, as we know that this area is very important in terms of biodiversity, we wanted to take specific action to conserve it. So we first began to do a self-assessment of the situation using a simple tool that we developed internally. And out of this, the result of this first self-assessment, we had, one of the results was the importance to get closer to the people that know about biodiversity better than us, to help us enrich the biodiversity action plan. So we decided to partner with the University of Malaysia, Terengganu, to conduct a more comprehensive biodiversity survey of the sites. So you can see the different type of analysis that has been done on that site. And the result was quite impressive because we found more than 300 species of flora and 74 species of fauna. And there were several species of interest, and one of them was the Nepenthes ampularia. It's a carnivorous plant that was recently reported as providing habitats for one of the smallest frogs in the world, that you may know better than me, which is Mycorrhiza epicola, and that frog seems to be discovered not so long ago, in 2010 in Borneo. So, out of these results, we know today that the site main activities are unlikely to have a negative impact on that biodiversity. But more than that, we highlight and we take consciousness of the fact that the good health of the ecosystem and the quality of the water in this off-river storage are linked. And the water sampling that we have done confirmed that the water in that water storage is better than in the river. So we decided to enhance the ecological management of the site with a wide range of action, including prevention of illegal encroachment, maintenance of access to the natural areas and water bodies, so that site could stay in communication with the forest reserve nearby, to plant some more indigenous plants and fruit trees, and to remove the identified invasive plants. And out of this survey and ecological management plan, the key learnings for us is that the better understanding of the importance of biodiversity at the site and related ecosystem services delivered. So that's really important because we realize also that the ecological management within the sites is not only to protect the natural heritage that we have, but also to conserve the ecosystem services that this biodiversity underpins, and that these ecosystem services have a direct impact on the water quality. And the water quality, that's basically the job that we are doing. The better the quality of the water is, the simpler our job is to produce the water and deliver it. So functional ecosystems contribute to a better control of these operational risk expenditure that are linked to the activities. So, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The next speaker is Jae-Won Song, who is at the Conservation Research Division of the National Institute for Environmental Research, Korea, which is part of the Ministry of Environment here in Korea. And he will be speaking on environmental policy for conservation of Korean amphibians. And he will be speaking in Korean, so Korean is not your language. This will be translated, and please get your headsets and welcome Dr. Song.
안녕하십니까. 저는 한국환경부 국민환경과학원의 서울대과학이라고 합니다. 반갑습니다. 오늘 제가 여러분께 말씀드릴 내용은 한국에서의 난소리에 대한 환경 정책에 대해서 말씀드리고자 합니다. 좀 전에 대리대학교의 유수학생께서 말씀하셨을 때 인도에도 여러